The story begins not with joy, but with the kind of pain no one should ever endure. Sophia Bennett was only 27 years old, glowing with the quiet beauty of an expectant mother. She should have been embraced with love and care, her days filled with laughter and gentle touches. But inside her home in Austin, Texas, she lived in a prison of silence. A silence built out of fear, shame, and the heavy weight of secrets. Sophia was not just any woman. She was a respected police officer in the city, holding a high position that many admired. People in her community saw her as strong, capable, and untouchable. But behind closed doors, Sophia hid bruises under her uniform, concealed swollen lips with makeup, and forced smiles when her colleagues asked if she was okay. She never dared to reveal the truth, not even to her father, Henry Bennett, the chief of police himself. To admit the abuse would not only shatter her pride, but also humiliate her father. So she stayed quiet, enduring blow after blow, praying it would stop. Her husband, Ethan Walker, was once the man who promised her the world. But promises turned to fists. His eyes no longer held love but contempt. He had a mistress now, a younger woman who stroked his ego and whispered poison in his ear. To Ethan, Sophia was nothing more than an obstacle, a burden with a child he didn't want. Every evening, his rage erupted. Sometimes it was words sharp enough to cut deeper than a knife. Other times it was his hands, brutal and merciless. Neighbors sometimes heard the shouting. They saw the lights flicker late at night. But in America, behind the tall fences of suburban homes, people often pretend not to hear. So Sophia endured alone, her belly growing heavier, her spirit growing weaker. She kept whispering to herself, "Just a few more months, I'll be a mother, I can survive this." But one night, the storm inside their house became too much. Ethan, drunk and furious after a fight with his mistress, turned on Sophia. His voice thundered with accusations, his fists slamming against the walls. Sophia tried to calm him, but her pleas only fueled his rage. He shoved her hard, harder than ever before. Her body lost balance. Her hands reached for the railing, but it was too late. The world spun as her feet slipped off the staircase. Time slowed as she fell, her arms wrapping instinctively around her unborn child. Her scream pierced the night, cut short by the sickening sound of her body crashing onto the floor below. Silence filled the house. Ethan froze at the top of the stairs, staring down at his unconscious wife. Blood pooled slowly across the wooden floor. For a moment his face twisted, not with guilt, but with irritation, as though she had ruined his evening once again. He pulled out his phone, not to call for help right away, but to text his mistress. "It's done," he typed coldly. And in that moment, the fate of Sophia and her unborn child hung between life and death. What Ethan did next would shock everyone, and it would unleash a storm he never imagined. Before tragedy struck, Sophia Bennett's life had been painted with shades of resilience and quiet sacrifice. Born and raised in Austin, Texas, she was the only daughter of Henry Bennett, the city's revered chief of police. Growing up in a household of honor and discipline, Sophia learned early what it meant to carry the weight of responsibility. While other girls dreamed of fairy tales, she dreamed of justice. Her father was her hero, and she wanted to follow in his footsteps to make him proud. By 25, she had already risen through the ranks of the police department. Colleagues admired her calm under pressure, her ability to negotiate tense situations, and her courage to walk into danger when others hesitated. Yet behind her uniform, Sophia was still human, the young woman longing for love, tenderness, and a family of her own. That longing led her into the arms of Ethan Walker. At first, Ethan was everything she thought she needed: charming, ambitious, and protective. He promised her the world, and for a while, he delivered glimpses of it. They married quickly, their smiles captured in wedding photographs that still hung in the hallway of their home. For a brief moment, Sophia believed she had it all: a meaningful career, a devoted husband, and the dream of becoming a mother. But dreams are fragile, and Sophia's began to crumble in silence. Ethan's charm was a mask, one that slipped away as soon as the wedding rings settled. He grew controlling, jealous, and bitter. The nights that once ended with laughter now ended with shouting. His hands that once held her gently now left bruises she carefully covered with long sleeves. Still, Sophia stayed. She told herself he would change, that love could fix what was broken. And when she discovered she was pregnant, she clung to hope. Maybe the baby will soften him, she whispered to herself. She believed that once Ethan held their child, his heart would transform. She wanted to give her child a complete family, no matter the cost to her own happiness. Every morning she put on her uniform, straightened her badge, and forced a smile. To her fellow officers she was untouchable. The rising star of the force, daughter of the chief, destined for greatness. To her father she was still his little girl, and he looked at her with pride that burned brighter than any metal. But he didn't know. He didn't see the way she winced when she moved too quickly, or how she avoided mirrors to hide the sadness in her eyes. Sophia chose silence because she feared the truth would break her father's heart. How could she admit that the man he had toasted at her wedding, the man he welcomed into their family, was destroying her piece by piece? She bore the pain alone, believing she could endure until her baby arrived. But pain does not stay hidden forever. Secrets always find their way to the surface. And the night she fell down the staircase, bleeding and broken, the truth was forced into the open. Henry Bennett, the man who had sworn to protect the city, would soon discover he had failed to protect the one person who mattered most. And once he knew, there would be no force on earth that could contain his fury. The Bennett household had always been filled with order and pride. Henry Bennett's name carried weight across Austin. As chief of police, he was a man both feared and respected, a leader who had built his reputation on justice and integrity. The city trusted him, and his officers admired him. Yet inside his daughter's home, just a short drive away from his own, a storm brewed in silence. Sophia's house with Ethan Walker looked perfect from the outside. It was a two-story suburban home in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where families hosted barbecues on weekends and children rode their bikes until sunset. To neighbors passing by, it seemed picture-perfect. A respected police officer wife, a husband with a promising career in finance, and a baby on the way. But appearances are deceiving. Behind those walls, the air was heavy with tension. The house itself bore the scars of violence. A broken picture frame shoved hastily into a drawer, a dent in the wall covered with a piece of art, and doors that no longer closed properly after being slammed too many times. Sophia had become skilled at hiding the evidence. She cleaned, patched, and covered, trying to erase the ugliness of her reality. Yet no matter how much she scrubbed, she couldn't wash away the fear that lived in her chest. At work, Sophia carried herself with poise. She handled high-stakes cases, briefed officers with authority, and walked into meetings like a pillar of strength. Her colleagues never imagined that the same woman who faced down armed criminals would go home to face an even greater danger in her own living room. She wore her uniform like armor, hiding the bruises underneath, convincing herself that if she could endure gunfire on the streets, she could endure Ethan's wrath behind closed doors. Ethan, meanwhile, played his role in public. Handsome, articulate, and charming, he knew how to mask his cruelty when others were watching. At neighborhood gatherings, he smiled at Sophia, placing his arm around her shoulders like a loving husband. People envied them, whispering how lucky Sophia was. But the moment the front door closed, his mask dropped. His voice turned sharp, his eyes darkened, and his hands became weapons. The tension reached its peak in the evenings. Sophia dreaded the sound of Ethan's car pulling into the driveway. She would freeze, her heart pounding, not knowing if tonight would bring a cold silence, a storm of insults, or fists slamming into her body. She tiptoed around him, doing everything to avoid triggering his temper. But nothing was ever enough. If dinner was too salty, if she was too tired to smile, if she asked about his late nights, rage would ignite. And all the while, Henry Bennett remained blind. He saw his daughter at Sunday dinners, smiling through clenched teeth, saying she was just tired from work. He noticed her baggy sweaters but never guessed what they concealed. His pride in her blinded him to the pain she carried. But secrets do not stay buried forever. And when the night came that Sophia's screams pierced the silence, the walls of that perfect suburban home could no longer hide the truth. What happened inside those walls would soon spill out into the streets, changing the lives of everyone involved forever. Ethan Walker was the kind of man who fooled everyone but those who lived with him. On the surface, he was polished, His suits were always pressed, his hair perfectly styled, his words sharp enough to impress clients and strangers alike. In the business world, he knew how to win trust with a handshake and a smile. To neighbors, he was the attentive husband who carried groceries, waved politely, and kept his lawn immaculate. But behind closed doors, Ethan was a man consumed by bitterness, entitlement, and rage. He had married Sophia, not out of love, but out of opportunity. Having a police officer wife, and the daughter of the chief no less, elevated his social standing. It gave him an aura of respectability he could never earn on his own. But once the ring was on her finger, his interest in her faded. He resented her strength, her position of authority, and the respect she commanded in a way he never could. Ethan craved control, and when Sophia resisted his dominance, he punished her. Sometimes it was with cruel words laced with venom, aimed to pierce her confidence. Other times it was his fists, delivered with frightening precision. He knew exactly how to strike without leaving marks too visible. He was not careless in his cruelty, he was calculated. His cruelty was fueled by something else. His mistress, Vanessa Reed. Vanessa was younger, ambitious, and manipulative. She worked at Ethan's firm, and together they shared whispered conversations in dark offices and late-night hotel rooms. Vanessa fed Ethan's ego, telling him he deserved better than Sophia, that he was wasting his life with a woman too strong, too proud, and now weakened by pregnancy. She told him what he wanted to hear, that Sophia was holding him back, and that freedom waited if he just had the courage to take it. With Vanessa at his side, Ethan's cruelty escalated. He came home late, reeking of perfume that wasn't Sophia's. When Sophia asked questions, he silenced her with his fists. When she begged him to stop, he sneered, "You're nothing without me." And when she reminded him she was carrying his child, he scoffed. That's not a blessing, it's an anchor. In his mind, Sophia had become disposable. She was no longer the polished trophy wife he paraded at parties, but a burden he wanted to shed. He believed she was too proud, too loyal, and too ashamed to ever expose him. And he was right, up to a point. What Ethan never considered was the bond between Sophia and her father. He underestimated the quiet strength that lived within her, the same strength that made her a respected officer. And he had no idea that the very walls he used to hide his abuse would soon betray him. Because secrets don't last forever. And the night Sophia fell, blood staining the wooden floors of their home, Ethan believed it was the end of his problem. But it was only the beginning. For when Henry Bennett discovered the truth, Ethan Walker would face a storm more terrifying than he ever imagined. The fall down the staircase should have been a wake-up call for Ethan Walker. A chance to realize the danger of his actions and the fragility of the life he carried in his hands. But for Ethan, it was nothing more than an inconvenience. He sat in the hospital waiting room that night, scrolling through his phone, his leg casually crossed, while his wife lay unconscious inside the emergency ward. He didn't pace with worry. He didn't ask the doctors for updates. Instead, he sent texts to Vanessa Reed, the mistress who had taken up more space in his heart than his unborn child ever would. "Don't worry," he typed coldly. "She'll survive. She always does. But she's weaker now, easier to get rid of." Vanessa responded with a heart emoji, as if Sophia's suffering was a joke, nothing more than a stepping stone toward the life she and Ethan envisioned together. The staff at the hospital noticed Ethan's indifference. Nurses whispered in corners about the husband who never once held his wife's hand or asked how the baby was doing. Even the doctor, who had seen countless tragedies, found it difficult to mask his disgust. But no one dared confront Ethan directly. After all, he was married to the chief of police's daughter. When Sophia eventually regained consciousness for brief moments, she was met not with comfort, but with humiliation. Ethan leaned over her hospital bed, his voice low, his words sharp. "Look at you," he sneered. "Pathetic. You can't even protect yourself, and you call yourself an officer?" His words cut deeper than the physical pain she felt. Tears filled her eyes, but she turned her face away, unwilling to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Neighbors began to whisper too. The story of Sophia's accident spread quickly, but the details were murky. Some claimed she had slipped because of exhaustion. Others muttered about shouting they had overheard before the fall. A few even speculated about Ethan's temper, but no one dared say it aloud. After all, appearances mattered, and confronting the truth was always harder than ignoring it. Sophia felt the sting of those whispers. When she returned briefly home between hospital visits, the women on her street offered her tight smiles, their eyes lingering on the bruises she couldn't quite hide. They didn't ask questions. They didn't offer comfort. Their silence was its own kind of judgment, as though her suffering was somehow her fault. At family gatherings, Ethan played the doting husband, holding Sophia's hand tightly enough to make it look convincing while his nails dug into her skin under the table. He smiled for relatives, fetched her water, and pretended to care. To everyone else, he was attentive and charming. To Sophia, he was a cruel puppeteer, pulling her strings to keep the illusion alive. The humiliation deepened when Ethan openly compared her to Vanessa. One night, after Sophia asked where he had been, he smirked and said, "Vanessa would never nag me like this. She knows how to treat a man." Sophia's heart sank, but she bit her tongue, swallowing her pride to avoid another blow. But humiliation has a way of planting seeds, seeds of anger, of resistance, of change. And though Sophia still hid her suffering from her father, the walls were beginning to crack. Soon, someone else would see the truth with their own eyes, and when that moment came, there would be no turning back. The hospital lights flickered dimly as Sophia lay in her bed, her body aching, her spirit shattered. She had always been strong, the kind of woman who never flinched in the face of danger, but now she felt like nothing more than a shell. The bruises covering her arms were painful, but the deeper wounds were invisible, etched into her heart, her pride, her very sense of self. At night, when the hallways of the hospital grew quiet, Sophia would stare at the ceiling, tears slipping silently down her face. The sound of the monitors was steady, but inside her, chaos raged. She thought of her unborn child, tiny and fragile, growing inside her despite the violence she had endured. She whispered promises into the darkness. "I'll protect you. I'll get us out. Just hold on." But even as she spoke the words, doubt poisoned her hope. Could she really protect her baby when she couldn't even protect herself? Her mind replayed the fall over and over. The sound of Ethan's voice, the shove, the helpless tumble down the stairs. She could still feel the fear wrapping around her as she curled her arms around her belly, praying the impact wouldn't end both their lives. Every time she closed her eyes, the memory struck again like lightning. Sleep became a cruel torment, filled with nightmares that left her gasping awake. The isolation was unbearable. Ethan rarely visited the hospital except to mock her. When he did appear, his words were daggers. "You're weak, Sophia. A disgrace. You're nothing without me." She would turn her face to the wall, refusing to meet his eyes, but the words sank in anyway. She had always been proud of her badge, her authority, her independence. Now she felt stripped of all of it. Friends and colleagues sent flowers, cards, and polite messages, but none of them knew the truth. To them, she was simply recovering from an accident. They believed Ethan's carefully crafted story, never suspecting the monster behind his mask. And Sophia, bound by shame and fear, let them believe it. She wanted to scream, to tell someone, but her voice locked in her throat. Even her father remained in the dark. Henry visited once, but Sophia forced a smile, insisting she had simply slipped. She saw the worry in his eyes, but he accepted her words, trusting her strength. The guilt ate at her. She wanted to cry out, "Dad, help me!" But the thought of his disappointment was unbearable. How could she shatter his pride by admitting the truth? Left alone, Sophia's mind wandered to the darkest places. She wondered if it would be easier to stop fighting, to let go, to drift away and free herself from the pain. One night, staring at the IV in her arm, she thought, "What if I just stopped trying?" The thought terrified her, but it lingered. Then, as her tears blurred the sterile room around her, she placed her hand over her stomach and felt the faintest kick. It was a reminder. Her child was still there, still alive, still fighting. A flicker of strength stirred within her. She knew she couldn't give up, not yet. But despair still clung to her like a shadow, and she had no idea that the moment of truth was drawing near. Because soon, her father would walk into her hospital room at exactly the wrong time and see everything she had tried so hard to hide. Henry Bennett had always trusted his daughter to be honest with him. He believed Sophia was strong enough to handle anything, just as he had raised her to be. but a gnawing worry had begun to eat at him ever since her accident. The explanation she gave him, that she had simply slipped on the stairs, sounded rehearsed. Her smile had been too forced, her eyes too guarded. He couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was hiding beneath the surface. One evening, Henry decided to pay her another visit at the hospital. He arrived quietly, carrying a bouquet of daisies, her favorite flowers since childhood. He walked down the sterile hallway, nodding to the nurses who respected him as the chief of police. To them, he was the face of strength, a man who never wavered. But tonight, Henry's steps were heavy. As he reached Sophia's door, he stopped. Voices floated through the crack. He recognized Ethan's sharp tone immediately. "You're worthless, Sophia," Ethan hissed. "You embarrass me. Look at you, lying there, pathetic, too weak to even stand. Do you think anyone still respects you? You're nothing but dead weight. I should have left you a long time ago." Henry froze, his heart pounding in his chest. His hand tightened on the doorknob, but he didn't move. He listened. Sophia's voice came next, fragile and trembling. "Please, Ethan, not here. Not now. The baby." "The baby?" Ethan spat, cutting her off. "That thing ruined everything. Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I wanted you? Vanessa is everything you'll never be. She's smart, beautiful, and she knows how to treat a man. Unlike you." Henry's blood ran cold. His daughter's muffled sob followed, and something inside him snapped. He pushed the door open, and the sight before him nearly brought him to his knees. Sophia lay in the hospital bed, tears streaking her pale face, her hands protectively covering her belly. Ethan stood over her, towering like a predator, his hand clenched into a fist at his side. For a moment, no one spoke. The room was heavy with the weight of truth finally revealed. "Dad," Sophia gasped, her eyes wide with horror. She hadn't wanted him to see this. Not like this. Henry's gaze shifted from his daughter to Ethan, and in that instant, every fiber of his being burned with rage. His voice was low, dangerous, trembling with fury. "You've been hitting my daughter?" Ethan smirked, straightening his tie as if nothing had happened. "Don't act surprised, Henry. She's not the perfect little princess you think she is. She's weak. She needed to be put in her place." The words hit Henry like bullets. Years of discipline and restraint barely held him back. His fists itched to strike, but he clenched them at his sides. He stepped closer, his eyes blazing. "You listen to me, Walker," Henry growled, his voice cold as steel. "If you ever touch her again, if you so much as breathe in her direction, I will personally make sure you regret the day you were born." Ethan didn't flinch. He laughed, a cruel sound that echoed through the room. "Big words, Chief, but you won't do anything. Because if you do, this little scandal will ruin your precious reputation. Your daughter's weakness will be splashed across every headline. Think about that before you threaten me." Henry's chest tightened. He looked back at Sophia, her broken form, her pleading eyes. Shame washed over him. He had been blind for too long, and now the truth stood naked before him. And as Henry left the hospital room that night, he swore to himself, the next time Ethan laid a hand on Sophia, he would not walk away alive. Henry Bennett drove home from the hospital with his knuckles white on the steering wheel, the city lights blurring through his windshield. For 30 years, he had lived by a code. Justice above all, the law before personal feelings. It was the oath he had sworn when he pinned on his badge. But now that oath felt like chains wrapped around his chest, tightening with every breath. He had seen criminals of every kind, murderers, thieves, abusers, but never had the face of evil cut him so deeply as when he looked into Ethan Walker's smug grin. Ethan wasn't just any man. He was Henry's son-in-law, the man who vowed to protect Sophia. And instead of protecting, he had nearly destroyed her. Henry's thoughts churned violently. I should have known. I should have seen the signs. Every bruise Sophia had explained away, every forced smile, every sweater pulled too tightly around her wrists, it all came rushing back. Guilt gnawed at him. He was the chief of police, yet he had failed the one person who mattered most. When he walked into his empty house, the silence was deafening. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, though it barely touched the fire in his veins. Rage simmered, threatening to boil over. He paced the living room, torn between two identities, the lawman who believed in procedure and the father whose daughter had been beaten and broken. If he followed the law, he would file charges, gather evidence, and let the system take its course. But systems were slow. Systems failed. He had seen abusers walk free, charm judges, and manipulate juries. Could he take that risk with Sophia's life? Could he stomach seeing Ethan slip through cracks he knew too well? His mind whispered dark thoughts. End it yourself. One bullet, one night, and it's over. He imagined Ethan's smirk wiped clean, the fear in his eyes when he realized the chief wasn't bluffing. For a moment, Henry's hands itched to reach for his service weapon, but then he saw Sophia's face in his mind, her soft voice calling him Dad. He knew if he crossed that line, he would not only lose his badge, he might lose her respect forever. The conflict tore him apart. The law demanded patience, fatherhood demanded action, and every second he waited, Ethan still walked free, still capable of hurting Sophia again. Henry stared at his reflection in the darkened window. His own eyes looked unfamiliar, hard, wild, desperate. He whispered to himself, "Justice will be served, one way or another." That night, Henry opened a file on Ethan Walker. He pulled every record, every financial transaction, every whisper of misconduct he could find. He would build a case so airtight Ethan couldn't escape. But deep down, Henry knew this wasn't just about law anymore. This was personal. And as he closed the file, his phone buzzed. It was a message from one of his officers, Daniel Brooks, a man Henry trusted like a son. The message was short, urgent. "Chief, you need to see this. Ethan's been spotted with his mistress again. It's worse than you think." Henry's jaw tightened. His blood roared in his ears. The time for waiting was slipping away, and Henry knew, sooner than later, he would have to choose between the law and vengeance. Vanessa Reed had always known how to get what she wanted. At 26, with striking red hair and a smile that could cut glass, she played her role well. The ambitious junior associate at Ethan Walker's firm who knew when to flatter, when to flirt, and when to sink her claws in deeper. To Ethan, she was the antidote to the burden of his wife. To Vanessa, Ethan was her ticket upward, out of mediocrity into the lifestyle she craved. But Vanessa wasn't just a distraction, she was fuel to the fire. When Ethan wavered, when guilt threatened to creep in, Vanessa whispered poison in his ear. "Why waste your life on her? She's holding you back. You could be free, Ethan, free to live the way you deserve." Her words dripped with venom, feeding the resentment already festering inside him. Together, they painted Sophia as the enemy. Vanessa mocked her pregnancy, laughing in private with Ethan. "She's pathetic," Vanessa sneered one night as they sat in a dim hotel room, walking around in those baggy clothes pretending she's some hero. "She doesn't deserve you, I do." Ethan smirked, intoxicated by the attention, blind to the fact that Vanessa's love was not for him, but for the power and money he promised. Word of their affair had started to spread in whispers. Daniel Brooks, Henry's trusted second-in-command, had begun to keep tabs on Ethan. When he saw Ethan slipping into a restaurant late at night with Vanessa on his arm, laughter spilling between them, Daniel's suspicion hardened into certainty. He snapped photos quietly, knowing they would matter later. Meanwhile, Sophia felt the betrayal deep in her bones. Though Ethan rarely bothered to hide his late nights anymore, hearing Vanessa's name was like salt in an open wound. She had once believed that if she gave Ethan a child, it would save their marriage. Instead, it only gave him more ammunition. "You can't even keep my attention," Ethan spat at her during one cruel argument. "Vanessa is everything you're not. Young, exciting, beautiful, you're just tired." Sophia broke that night. She locked herself in the bathroom, sinking to the cold tile floor, clutching her swollen belly as sobs racked her body. For the first time, she whispered the truth to herself. "I can't fix this. He doesn't love me. He never will." The admission cut deep, but it also cracked open the walls she had built. Still, she stayed silent with her father, too afraid of the shame. But Daniel, who had admired Sophia quietly for years, began to see through the lies. He noticed the bruises, the way her eyes darted when Ethan's name was mentioned, the trembling in her voice when she claimed she was fine. He carried the photos of Ethan and Vanessa in his pocket, waiting for the right moment. And that moment was coming. Because Vanessa, drunk on her own arrogance, made a mistake. She walked into a crowded downtown cafe with Ethan in broad daylight, kissing him as if the world owed her their approval. Cameras flashed. Strangers pulled out phones. Within hours, the images were online. Ethan Walker and Vanessa Reed, locked in a passionate embrace while his pregnant wife lay in a hospital bed. The whispers turned into shouts. The mask was slipping. And when Henry Bennett saw those photos, the fury that had been simmering inside him erupted into a firestorm no one could contain. Sophia Bennett had endured years of silence, burying her pain beneath duty and pride. But when the photos of Ethan and Vanessa exploded across the internet, something inside her finally snapped. Lying in her hospital bed, her phone buzzing with notifications, Sophia stared at the images in disbelief. There was Ethan, her husband, kissing his mistress in broad daylight, his hands gripping Vanessa's waist with a passion he had long denied Sophia. The headlines screamed betrayal. Wealthy businessman and chief son-in-law caught cheating while wife lies in hospital. Her stomach churned, not from pregnancy but from humiliation. Everyone knew now. The whispers that had haunted her neighborhood were no longer whispers. They were public knowledge. She imagined her colleagues scrolling through the photos, pity in their eyes. She pictured her father, seeing his son-in-law's true colors splashed across news outlets. The shame burned her, but mixed with it was something else, a spark. For the first time, Sophia stopped asking, "What will people think?" and started asking, "What about me?" That night, as the hospital lights dimmed, Sophia pressed her hand to her swollen belly and made a silent vow. "No more. I won't let him destroy us. I won't raise my child in this nightmare." Her tears dried on her cheeks, replaced by determination. The pain remained, but it no longer chained her. It fueled her. The next morning, Daniel Brooks walked into her room carrying a folder. He hesitated before speaking. "Sophia," he said gently, "you need to see this." He handed her the photos, clear, damning evidence of Ethan and Vanessa's affair. Sophia's hands trembled as she flipped through them, but instead of breaking down, she felt her resolve harden. "I already know," she whispered. "I've lived this lie long enough. It ends now." Daniel studied her, concern etched across his face. "Then you need protection. If Ethan realizes you're planning to leave, he'll become more dangerous. Let me help you. Let your father help you." Sophia shook her head, her voice steady. "Not yet. If I tell my dad now, he'll kill Ethan, and I can't let him throw his life away for mine. I need to do this right. I need to do this my way." For days, Sophia quietly planned. She spoke with a lawyer in secret, began preparing documents, and reached out to a shelter for women who had lived through the same nightmare. She hid her strength behind silence, never letting Ethan suspect that the tide was turning. But Ethan wasn't blind. He noticed the subtle shift in her eyes, the quiet defiance in her tone. One evening, as he stood at the foot of her hospital bed, his voice turned cold. "Don't think you can leave me, Sophia. You're nothing without me. If you try, I'll make sure you regret it." Sophia met his gaze for the first time in years without fear. Her voice was soft but steady. "We'll see." That night, as she drifted into uneasy sleep, a storm gathered outside, lightning flashing across the Austin skyline. The time for secrets was ending, and the battle for her freedom and her life was about to begin. For days after the scandal went public, Sophia Bennett found herself trapped in a storm of emotions. Humiliation pressed down on her like a heavy blanket, suffocating her. Everywhere she turned, on television, on social media, even whispered in hospital corridors, her husband's betrayal followed her. Reporters camped outside, hungry for a glimpse of the broken wife of Ethan Walker. She felt stripped bare, her private suffering now public spectacle. One afternoon, as the rain battered against her hospital window, Sophia finally broke. Alone in the sterile room, she buried her face in her hands and sobbed with a force that shook her body. Years of silence, years of bruises hidden beneath uniforms, years of whispered prayers that went unanswered, all of it spilled out. Her cries echoed off the walls, raw and desperate. "Why me?" she choked. "Why did I believe him? Why did I let it go this far?" For a moment, she felt utterly powerless. The woman who had once walked into dangerous streets with her badge held high now felt like nothing more than a shadow. She thought of her father, of how proud he had always been, and shame clawed at her chest. "I've failed him. I've failed myself. I've failed this child." Her breathing grew uneven, panic seizing her chest. She pressed the call button, and nurses rushed in, their calm voices steadying her. "It's okay, Sophia. You're safe. Breathe." Slowly, her heart rate steadied, but the emotional weight remained. Then something shifted. As the nurse left, Sophia's eyes fell on the small ultrasound photo taped to the side of her bed. The blurry black and white image of her unborn child seemed to stare back at her, fragile yet determined. A wave of clarity washed over her. She wasn't fighting just for herself anymore. She was fighting for the life inside her. She wiped her tears with trembling hands, her sobs quieting into steady breaths. For the first time in weeks, a thought rang in her mind with sharp clarity. I'm not a victim. I'm still a mother. I'm still an officer. I'm still me. Her breakdown had burned her to ashes, but from those ashes rose something stronger. She sat upright, her back straight, her jaw set. She whispered to herself, no more crying, no more hiding. I will not let him win. When Daniel Brooks visited later that evening, he noticed the change instantly. You look different, he said cautiously. Sophia nodded. I am different. I've been broken, but I'm not staying broken. He tried to silence me, but I still have a voice, and I'm going to use it. Daniel's eyes softened, admiration flickering in them. Then let us help you. Let your father help you. You don't have to fight this alone. Sophia exhaled slowly, her resolve hardening. I know, but the next move has to be mine. Ethan thinks he still controls me. Let him believe that, for now. When the time is right, I'll take everything back. She pressed her hand firmly against her belly, her eyes burning with new fire. Outside, thunder rumbled again, shaking the hospital walls. And with that storm came the promise of change. Because Sophia Bennett was no longer just surviving. She was preparing to fight. Once Sophia Bennett embraced her decision to fight back, her mind shifted into survival mode. Years of police training had taught her how to read people, how to track details, and how to gather evidence without being noticed. Now those skills would no longer serve the city. They would save her life. Every interaction with Ethan became an opportunity. When he visited her at the hospital, pretending to play the role of the concerned husband, Sophia forced herself to stay calm. She memorized his words, the way his eyes darted when he mentioned Vanessa, the inconsistencies in his excuses. She let him believe she was still weak, still broken. But under the blanket, her phone recorded every cruel remark he let slip. At night, when the hallways were quiet, she backed up those recordings onto a private email account only she could access. Slowly, a file began to grow. A file that told the truth Ethan had worked so hard to hide. But evidence wasn't enough. She needed allies. Quietly, she reached out to a lawyer recommended by a nurse who had once escaped her own abusive marriage. The lawyer's name was Rachel Morgan, a sharp-minded woman who had built her career defending women who felt trapped. When Sophia explained her situation in hushed tones, Rachel didn't judge. She only nodded and said, "We'll build this case brick by brick. He won't touch you again." Daniel Brooks became another silent ally. Though he kept his distance in public, he was watching Ethan closely, tracking his late-night meetings with Vanessa, documenting his reckless behavior. He slipped Sophia a small flash drive one evening, filled with photos of Ethan's affair. "These will matter," he whispered. Still, the most difficult piece of the plan was her father. Henry Bennett remained in the dark, unaware that Sophia was moving quietly beneath his nose. She wanted to tell him, but she feared his rage would destroy everything. She pictured him pulling his gun on Ethan, throwing away his career, his freedom, his life. She couldn't let that happen, not yet. So she smiled at him during visits, hiding her fire behind tired eyes. Day by day, Sophia grew stronger. She practiced standing, walking down the hospital corridors with determination. The nurses cheered her progress, unaware that each step brought her closer to her escape. But danger loomed close. Ethan was not a fool. He noticed the subtle change in her tone, the way she no longer begged or pleaded. One night, he leaned close to her bed and hissed, "Don't think I don't see it. You're planning something. Don't forget, I always win." Sophia met his eyes, her expression calm, her heart pounding. She didn't answer. Silence was her weapon now. When Ethan left, she clutched the flash drive in her pocket, her hand trembling. She had the truth, she had a lawyer, she had allies. But she also knew one thing for certain: Ethan would strike harder once he realized he was losing control. And that realization came faster than she expected. Because the very next day, Ethan discovered something that made him furious. Sophia had filed the first document for divorce. The morning Ethan Walker discovered the divorce filing, the calm mask he wore for the world shattered. The papers arrived at his office in a neat envelope, stamped with the authority of the court. At first he laughed, certain it was some mistake. Sophia had always been too afraid, too submissive, too dependent to defy him. But as his eyes scanned the bold letters, "Petition for dissolution of marriage," his laughter turned into a roar. He stormed out of his office, slamming the door so hard the glass trembled in its frame. His employees exchanged nervous glances as he barreled past them, his face twisted with rage. Vanessa tried to call him, but he ignored her, consumed by a single thought: Sophia thinks she can leave me. When he arrived at the hospital, the automatic doors barely had time to open before he shoved through them. Nurses stiffened as his footsteps thundered down the hall. He burst into Sophia's room without knocking, the papers clenched in his hand like a weapon. "You think this is funny?" Ethan shouted, slamming the documents onto her bed. His eyes burned with fury, his voice booming. "You think you can humiliate me like this? Divorce me? You wouldn't last a day without me." Sophia's heart pounded, but for the first time she didn't flinch. She sat upright, her hand protectively on her belly, and looked him straight in the eye. Her voice was calm, steady. "I've lasted years with you, Ethan. I'll survive without you." His face twisted, disbelief flashing across it. He had expected tears, begging, weakness. Instead, he saw something unfamiliar: strength. And that terrified him more than anything. "You'll regret this," he snarled, his hand gripping the bed rail until his knuckles whitened. "You think your daddy's badge will save you? Think again. I own you, Sophia. I always will." Sophia didn't look away. Not anymore. Ethan raised his hand, the old reflex of violence, but before it could fall, Daniel Brooks stepped into the room. His voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Put your hand down, Walker. Right now." Ethan froze, glaring at Daniel, who stood tall in his uniform, his eyes steady. For a moment, the two men locked in a silent battle, the predator against the protector. Ethan lowered his hand slowly but smirked. "Ah, the loyal lapdog. Always hanging around, aren't you? Careful, Brooks. You'll end up just like her. Weak." Daniel ignored the insult, moving closer to Sophia's side. "She's not weak, and she's not alone anymore." Ethan's smirk faltered, but only for a second. He snatched the divorce papers from the bed, crumpling them in his fist. "This isn't over," he hissed before storming out, the door slamming so hard the walls shook. Sophia exhaled, her body trembling. Daniel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "He's scared," he said quietly. "That means you're winning." For the first time, Sophia allowed herself a small smile. She had stood her ground. She had looked her abuser in the eye and refused to break. But outside that hospital room, Ethan Walker was already plotting. And the next move he planned wouldn't just threaten Sophia. It would drag her entire family into the line of fire. Ethan Walker had always thrived on control. When Sophia dared to file for divorce, she had struck at the very foundation of his power. Rage consumed him, but underneath that fury was something darker. Fear. Fear that the perfect mask he had built for the world would shatter. Fear that without Sophia, without her father's influence, he would be exposed for the fraud he was. He spent the night pacing his sleek apartment. Vanessa sprawled lazily on the couch with a glass of wine. She scrolled through the headlines mocking his downfall, but instead of sympathy, she laughed. "You're trending, Ethan," she teased, holding up her phone. "The whole city's talking about you. Cheating husband abandons pregnant wife? Doesn't exactly scream business success." Ethan snatched the phone from her, hurling it against the wall. The screen cracked, the sound echoing through the room. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "Careful," she hissed. "You're no good to me if you lose everything. Pull yourself together." Her coldness stung him, but it also sharpened his desperation. He couldn't afford to lose her. Not after he had sacrificed so much. If Vanessa left, he would be nothing. So he made a choice. He would fight back, no matter how dirty the methods. The next morning, Ethan marched into his lawyer's office, demanding a strategy. "She wants a divorce? Fine. I'll bleed her dry. She won't get a dime. I'll paint her as unstable, unfit to be a mother. Who's going to believe the sob story of a pregnant woman with emotional issues?" The lawyer hesitated, glancing at the file. "She's the chief's daughter, Ethan, and a respected officer herself. This won't be easy." Ethan leaned forward, his eyes burning. "Then make it easy. Dig up dirt. Twist stories. Do whatever it takes." Outside the courtroom, Ethan began his smear campaign. He whispered to colleagues that Sophia was mentally unstable, that the pregnancy had made her erratic, that she had thrown herself down the stairs in a fit of hysteria. He hinted at corruption, suggesting that Henry Bennett was using his position to shield his daughter. Gossip spread like wildfire, poisoning reputations. Sophia soon heard the lies trickling back to her. Nurses looked at her differently. Reporters camped outside her hospital window, hungry for scandal. Each headline cut deeper. Officers' breakdown, friends questioned Sophia's stability. It was Ethan's fingerprints all over it, and Sophia knew it. But Ethan wasn't finished. Late one night, he called Vanessa, his voice low and frantic. "If she wins this case, I'm ruined. I need leverage. I need something big." Vanessa sighed, swirling her wine. "Then find it. Or maybe you're not the man I thought you were." The words ignited him. He slammed his fist against the table. He couldn't lose. He wouldn't lose. If the law didn't protect his control, he would take matters into his own hands. That same night, Ethan sat in his car outside the hospital, his eyes fixed on the glowing window of Sophia's room. His hand drummed against the steering wheel, his mind racing with dark possibilities. And as the engine hummed beneath him, Ethan Walker made a silent vow. If Sophia thought divorce would free her, she hadn't seen what he was truly capable of yet. The rain had stopped, but the air outside the hospital was thick with tension. Ethan Walker sat in his car, staring at the window where Sophia's room glowed faintly. His mind was a battlefield of rage and desperation. Divorce papers, public humiliation, whispers of failure, everything was slipping out of his control. And when Ethan lost control, he became dangerous. He slammed his car door shut and strode through the hospital entrance with the confidence of a man who believed the world owed him obedience. The nurses stiffened, exchanging worried glances. They had seen the headlines, heard the whispers. They knew trouble was coming, but none dared to block his path. Ethan carried himself like a storm, and storms could not be stopped. He reached Sophia's room and burst in without knocking. Sophia, resting in her bed with a book in her lap, looked up, her heart skipping a beat. For weeks she had prepared herself for this moment, but the sight of him still sent a shiver down her spine. Ethan closed the door behind him, his smirk cold. "So this is what it's come to?" he sneered, tossing the crumpled divorce papers onto her bed. "You really think you can make a fool of me?" Sophia steadied her breath. Her voice, though soft, was unwavering. "You already made a fool of yourself, Ethan. I'm just finished pretending." The words struck him like a slap. He stepped closer, his jaw tightening, his fists clenching. "Don't push me, Sophia. You know what I'm capable of." Sophia didn't flinch. "Yes," she said, her hand resting on her belly. "I know exactly what you're capable of, and that's why I'm done." Ethan's rage boiled over. He lunged forward, grabbing her wrist with crushing force. Sophia winced but refused to cry out. She stared him down, her silence more defiant than any scream. And then the door swung open. "Get your hands off my daughter!" Henry Bennett's voice thundered through the room like a gunshot. The chief of police stepped inside, his eyes blazing, his presence filling the space. He had arrived early for a surprise visit, only to walk straight into the nightmare he had feared most. Ethan released Sophia's wrist but didn't back down. He smirked, his arrogance unshaken. "Chief," he drawled, "always the hero. Too bad you can't protect her from herself." Henry's fists clenched at his sides, his body trembling with rage. "You've crossed the line for the last time, Walker. Lay another finger on her, and I'll bury you in a cell so deep you'll never see the sun again." Ethan chuckled darkly, leaning close to Henry. "You think the law will save her? The law is slow. The law is weak. By the time you do anything, she'll already be gone." Sophia's eyes widened, fear striking her heart. "Gone? What did he mean?" Henry stepped forward, his voice low and deadly. "Try me." For the first time, Ethan's smirk faltered. The storm he carried inside met the immovable force of a father's fury. And in that moment, the balance of power shifted. But Ethan wasn't finished. He had one last card to play. And soon, Henry would realize that the battle was only just beginning. Henry Bennett had built his career on uncovering lies, but never had an investigation cut so close to his own heart. After the confrontation at the hospital, his fury burned hotter than ever. But fury alone wouldn't protect Sophia. He needed proof, solid, undeniable evidence that would not only end Ethan's reign of terror, but strip him of every ounce of power he thought he held. Back at the precinct, Henry locked his office door and began pulling files. He started with Ethan's financial records, accessing them quietly through connections that owed him favors. What he found made his jaw tighten. Ethan's accounts were a tangled web of debt, hidden credit cards, and suspicious withdrawals. Money flowed in and out like water, and much of it led to luxury hotels, jewelry stores, and high-end restaurants. The trail pointed straight to Vanessa Reed. But that wasn't the shocking part. The deeper Henry dug, the darker the picture became. Ethan wasn't just reckless with money, he was corrupt. Several payments linked directly to shady contractors, names Henry recognized from prior investigations into organized crime. Ethan had been laundering money, hiding it behind his firm's polished exterior. Henry leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. This isn't just abuse. This is criminal. Federal criminal. He pulled surveillance reports next, reaching out to Daniel Brooks for support. Daniel arrived with a manila folder, his face grim. "Chief, you need to see this." Inside were photographs of Ethan meeting with known associates of a local gang, men who had been on Henry's radar for years. In one image, Ethan was shaking hands with a man notorious for violent extortion schemes. Henry's stomach turned. This wasn't just about Sophia anymore. Ethan Walker was a ticking bomb, a man tangled in a world of crime that could explode and take innocent lives with it. But what shook Henry most was what Daniel said next. "Sir, I think he's planning something. He's desperate, and desperate men don't play by rules. Word is he's been asking questions about how to disappear, how to take someone with him." The implication made Henry's blood run cold. Ethan wasn't just threatening Sophia's reputation. He might be planning to take her and the baby away permanently. Henry stood, slamming the folder shut. His voice was low, steady, but his hands trembled with rage. "Then we don't have time. We take him down now." Daniel hesitated. "Sir, with respect, we need more evidence before we move formally. If we rush this, he could slip through the cracks." Henry's jaw clenched. The law demanded patience, but patience could cost his daughter her life. He paced the office, torn between duty and desperation. For decades, he had taught younger officers that justice must always follow the rules. But now those same rules felt like chains holding him back while his daughter stood in danger. Finally, he stopped, his decision written on his face. "Fine. We'll build the case. But if he makes one move toward Sophia, I won't wait for the law. I'll end him myself." As the words left his mouth, Henry's phone buzzed on his desk. He picked it up, his eyes narrowing at the message. It was from an unknown number. "She won't be safe much longer. You can't protect her forever." Henry's hands shook as he read it, because whoever sent the message wasn't Ethan. It was someone worse. Sophia Bennett thought filing for divorce would be the hardest step, but as she prepared for the looming court battle, a darker storm gathered around her, one she didn't yet see, but Henry did. The anonymous message he had received the night before gnawed at him like a blade pressed against his throat. "She won't be safe much longer. You can't protect her forever." Henry didn't tell Sophia about the message, not yet. She was already carrying enough weight, recovering from her injuries, protecting her unborn child, and bracing herself to face Ethan in court. But the warning made him double her security. He ordered 2 trusted officers to guard the hospital floor around the clock, though he disguised it as standard procedure. Sophia noticed, of course. She always noticed. "Dad," she said one evening, her voice soft but firm, "why are there suddenly 2 uniforms outside my door?" Henry forced a smile. "Protocol. High-profile cases draw attention." But Sophia's eyes narrowed. She had worn the same badge too long to be fooled by vague answers. Still, she let it go, focusing instead on the stack of papers in front of her. Statements, evidence, and testimonies Rachel Morgan had compiled for the divorce proceedings. "Ethan's lawyer will come at you hard," Rachel warned, flipping through the files. "They'll try to paint you as unstable, emotional, even unfit to be a mother. But the recordings, the photos, the witnesses, they'll be hard to refute. We have a solid case." Sophia nodded, her resolve steady. "I don't care what they call me. I just want my child safe. I want him out of our lives forever." But safety was an illusion. That same night, Ethan sat in a smoky bar with 2 men Henry knew all too well, enforcers for a local gang tied to money laundering and extortion. Ethan's desperation had pushed him into their arms. "I need leverage," he muttered, his voice sharp. "Something to shut her up, something that scares her so much she'll drop the divorce." The men exchanged glances, their smirks cruel. "Scaring people is what we do best," one replied, "but it'll cost you." Ethan didn't hesitate. He slid an envelope of cash across the table. "Do it. Make sure she knows she's not untouchable." The next morning, Sophia found a single red rose placed on her hospital nightstand. No one knew who had left it. The nurses swore they hadn't seen anyone enter. Attached to the stem was a small note written in messy handwriting. "Accidents happen twice." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. She clutched the note, her heart pounding. She didn't need to ask who had sent it. This was Ethan, or worse, someone working for him. When Henry saw the note, his fury ignited. He crushed it in his fist, his voice trembling with rage. "This isn't just Ethan anymore. He's dragged other devils into this." Sophia placed her hand on her belly, fear twisting inside her. She whispered, "Dad, what if they come for the baby?" Henry looked at her, his jaw set like stone. "Then they'll have to go through me first." But neither of them realized the threat was already closer than they thought, lurking just outside the hospital, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The hospital had always felt like a fortress to Sophia Bennett, a place where walls and guards could shield her from Ethan's wrath. But that illusion shattered one rainy night, when the shadows outside her room moved with purpose. It began with a flicker of lights in the hallway. The steady hum of machines briefly cut out before restarting, almost too quickly to notice. But Sophia noticed. Her instincts as an officer never dulled. Her hand froze on the glass of water she was lifting. Something wasn't right. Minutes later, one of the officers assigned to guard her door excused himself to check a noise down the corridor. The second officer, a young rookie, remained stationed outside. Sophia exhaled, telling herself it was nothing, but her nerves buzzed with unease. Then the door handle rattled. Sophia's heart leapt. The rookie peeked inside. "Everything okay, ma'am?" Before she could answer, a figure dressed in hospital scrubs shoved past him. The intruder wore a surgical mask and gloves, but his eyes burned with malice. In his hand gleamed a syringe filled with a clear liquid. The rookie officer reacted instantly, grappling with the man, but the intruder was stronger, trained. They struggled in the doorway, the syringe clattering to the floor. Sophia screamed, clutching her belly as adrenaline surged through her veins. Within seconds, the second guard returned, tackling the intruder to the ground. The syringe rolled across the tile until it stopped at Sophia's feet. Her eyes locked on it, horror flooding her chest. Whatever was inside had been meant for her, or her unborn child. Alarms blared as hospital security rushed in. The intruder fought like a cornered animal, but eventually he was restrained. When his mask was ripped away, the room went silent. He wasn't hospital staff at all. He was a known enforcer connected to the same gang Henry had been investigating. Henry arrived minutes later, his face pale, his fists clenched. He demanded answers, his booming voice filling the hallway. "Who sent you? Was it Walker?" The man smirked, blood trickling from his lip. "Accidents happen, Chief. Maybe tonight wasn't your daughter's night, but there's always tomorrow." Henry nearly lost control. It took 3 officers to hold him back. His rage was volcanic, the sight of his daughter trembling in fear almost more than he could bear. Sophia reached for him, her hand shaking. "Dad, he was here for me. For the baby." Henry knelt beside her, his voice breaking. "I won't let them touch you. I swear it." But deep down he knew this was only the beginning. Ethan's desperation had opened the door to something far more dangerous than a failing marriage. Now criminals had a target on Sophia, and the law moved too slowly to stop them all. Later that night, as Sophia lay awake, she replayed the image of the syringe again and again. She had come so close, too close. And though the intruder was in custody, she couldn't shake the feeling that another attempt was coming. Outside, in the dark parking lot, Ethan Walker sat in his car, watching the flashing police lights with a twisted smile. He hadn't lifted the syringe himself, but he had set everything in motion, and he was far from finished. The attempt on her life shook Sophia Bennett to her core. For years, she had carried the burden of silence, convincing herself she could endure Ethan's cruelty without dragging anyone else into the storm. But the syringe lying on the hospital floor had stripped away that illusion. This wasn't just about bruises hidden beneath uniforms or whispers of infidelity. This was life and death, for her and her unborn child. When Henry Bennett entered her room the next morning, Sophia's eyes were swollen from tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed in front of anyone else. He stood silently for a moment, his massive frame filling the doorway, his badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. For decades, Henry had been the shield of the city, but today he looked like a father fighting back his own breaking point. Sophia motioned for him to sit. Her voice was soft but steady. "Dad, I can't keep this from you anymore." Henry's jaw tightened, his eyes locking on hers. "Tell me," he said. His tone wasn't the command of a chief, it was the plea of a father. And so she did. Sophia poured out everything she had hidden for years. The first shove after their wedding, the insults whispered like venom, the bruises she had covered with makeup, the night he pushed her down the stairs. Every detail spilled into the quiet room, each word heavier than the last. She told him about Ethan's mistress, about the threats, about the humiliation he had forced her to endure. She confessed her shame, her fear, and her silence. Henry listened without interrupting, though with every sentence, his fists clenched tighter. His knuckles turned white and his eyes glistened with a fury Sophia had never seen before. When she finished, he leaned forward, his voice rough with emotion. "You should have told me," he whispered. "You should have trusted me." Tears rolled down Sophia's cheeks. "I was ashamed. I didn't want you to see me as weak. I didn't want you to lose your career because of me." Henry reached across the bed, taking her trembling hand in his. "Weak, Sophia? You've been stronger than anyone I know. You survived what most couldn't. But you don't have to fight this alone anymore. Not as my daughter, not as an officer. From this moment on, we fight together." The weight that had crushed Sophia for so long began to lift. For the first time, she allowed herself to lean on him, resting her head against his hand. In that moment, the line between chief and daughter blurred. They were simply family, united against a common enemy. Daniel Brooks entered quietly, sensing the shift. He placed a folder on the table. "Chief, Sophia, I've gathered more evidence on Ethan's dealings. Bank transfers, meetings with gang members, connections to Vanessa. Enough to bring charges, serious ones." Henry's eyes darkened as he flipped through the papers. "Then it's time. We take him down legally, publicly, and permanently." Sophia exhaled, her voice resolute. "And if the law isn't fast enough?" Henry met her gaze, his expression grim but unyielding. "Then the law won't be the only thing he has to fear." Neither of them knew that Ethan, already cornered, was preparing his most dangerous move yet, one that would test just how far they were willing to go. Ethan Walker had always been arrogant, but now he was desperate. The walls were closing in. Divorce papers, photographs of his affair, whispers of money laundering, and the botched attempt on Sophia's life. He felt his power slipping away, and desperation made him reckless. He sat in a dingy motel room, the blinds drawn tight. Vanessa Reed sprawled across the bed with her phone in hand. She scrolled through social media, her lips curling into a sneer. "You're a joke now, Ethan," she said coldly. "The city's laughing at you. The chief's daughter is painting you as a monster and everyone believes her." Ethan slammed his fist against the dresser. "She is a monster. She's ruining me, ruining us." Vanessa rolled her eyes, unimpressed. "Don't drag me into this. You wanted me because I made you feel powerful. But right now, you're pathetic. If you can't handle her, maybe you're not the man I thought you were." Her words cut deeper than any knife. Rage twisted inside Ethan, but fear lurked beneath it. He couldn't lose Vanessa. Not after everything. She was his prize, the proof he deserved better than Sophia. If she left, he would have nothing. So he made a choice. A dangerous one. "I'll end it," Ethan muttered, pacing the room. "Not with threats, not with games. If the court won't side with me, if her father thinks he can crush me, then I'll take away what they love most." Vanessa sat up, her brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" Ethan's eyes darkened. "The baby. Without it, she has nothing. She'll crawl back to me, broken, begging." For the first time, Vanessa looked unsettled. "Ethan, that's insane. You're talking about murder." But Ethan was already dialing a number. On the other end, a gravelly voice answered. "Walker? I told you we don't like unfinished business." Ethan's tone was sharp, commanding. "Then finish it. I want it done clean this time. No mistakes. You get rid of her or that child, and you'll have more money than you can count." There was a pause. Then the voice chuckled darkly. "Consider it handled." Back at the hospital, Sophia tried to focus on her upcoming court appearance. Rachel Morgan had laid out the strategy. Daniel Brooks had assured her of added protection, and Henry Bennett had promised justice. For the first time in years, Sophia felt the weight of hope. But hope was fragile. That night, as she drifted to sleep, a nurse she didn't recognize entered her room, her movements too quick, too rehearsed. Sophia's instincts screamed danger. She reached for the call button, but the nurse caught her wrist, leaning close. "Shh," the woman whispered, her voice laced with menace. "This won't hurt a bit." Sophia's heart pounded as she fought back, her strength fueled by fear for her child. The woman's grip tightened, her other hand reaching into her pocket. At that moment, the door burst open. Henry and Daniel stormed in, weapons drawn, shouting commands. The intruder froze, caught between escape and capture. And in the seconds that followed, Sophia realized this wasn't just Ethan's desperation anymore, it was war. The intruder stood frozen under the harsh hospital lights, her disguise unraveling. The wig slipped off during the struggle, revealing sharp, cold eyes. Daniel Brooks pressed her against the wall, handcuffing her wrists with practiced speed. Henry Bennett's gun remained steady, his jaw clenched tight with fury. "Who sent you?" Henry barked, his voice thunderous. The woman smirked, blood trickling from a cut on her lip. "You already know, Chief. Your son-in-law doesn't like to lose." Henry's chest tightened, but his voice was ice. "Ethan Walker. Where is he?" She laughed, low and bitter. "Do you think he tells us where he hides? Men like him pay in cash and keep their distance. But make no mistake, he wants her gone." Sophia, still shaking, clutched her stomach protectively. The weight of those words pressed down on her like chains. She'd always feared Ethan's fists, but this was different. This was organized, planned, relentless. He wasn't just trying to scare her anymore, he was trying to erase her. Daniel dragged the woman out as backup officers swarmed the floor. Henry moved to Sophia's side, his large hand covering hers. His voice softened, though anger still simmered beneath. "You're safe. I swear it. I'll never let him touch you again." But safety was temporary. The attempted attack triggered a full investigation, and Henry demanded answers. Within hours, his team uncovered what he had long suspected: Ethan's financial web tied directly to organized crime. Payments traced to gang leaders, suspicious contracts funneled through his firm, and now a confirmed hit ordered on his own wife. Henry sat in his office late into the night. The evidence sprawled across his desk. Each page, each photograph, each bank statement tightened the noose around Ethan's neck. Yet the chief of police felt no satisfaction. This wasn't a case to him. It was personal, raw, and dangerous. Daniel entered quietly, his face grim. "Sir, it's all here. Enough to indict him on money laundering, conspiracy, and attempted murder." "But—" He hesitated. Henry looked up sharply. "But what?" Daniel placed another folder on the desk. "The gangs he's dealing with won't let him fall quietly. If Ethan goes down, he'll take others with him, and they'll come after Sophia again to send a message." Henry's fist slammed the desk. "Let them try. I'll burn every last one of them to the ground." Meanwhile, across the city, Ethan sat in the same motel room, pacing like a caged animal. Vanessa Reed watched him with growing unease. "They caught her?" she asked. Ethan's glare could have cut glass. "Yes, and now Bennett has everything he needs to bury me." Vanessa crossed her arms, her tone sharp. "Then maybe you should run. Cut your losses before it's too late." But Ethan shook his head violently. "Run? No, I don't run. If I go down, I'm taking Sophia with me. She doesn't get to win." Vanessa studied him for a long moment, realization dawning in her eyes. The man she thought was her golden ticket was nothing more than a sinking ship. Slowly, she began to gather her things. Ethan noticed, his face twisting. "Where are you going?" Vanessa met his gaze coldly. "Away from you. I won't drown for your mistakes." Ethan's fury exploded, but she was already out the door. He was alone now, angrier, more desperate than ever. And as Henry signed the warrant for Ethan's arrest, Ethan was planning his most violent move yet, a final act that would shake the entire city. The arrest warrant for Ethan Walker was signed just after dawn. Stared at the document, the ink still fresh, his hands steady despite the fire raging inside him. After weeks of humiliation, violence, and near-death encounters, justice was finally within reach. Ethan would no longer be a free man. Teams of officers spread across the city, quietly preparing to move in. Daniel Brooks coordinated the operation, his voice calm but urgent over the radio. "We've confirmed his last known location, motel on the east side. Units, stand by for signal." But Ethan Walker was not a man who accepted defeat easily. Word of the warrant reached him before the police did. A contact tipped him off, warning that the law was coming. Ethan's first reaction wasn't fear, it was fury. Inside his motel room, he paced like a wild animal, smashing lamps and kicking over furniture. His reflection in the cracked mirror was unrecognizable. Disheveled hair, bloodshot eyes, a man unraveling. "She did this," he spat. "Sophia and her precious father? They think they can destroy me? No, I'll destroy them first." He opened a duffel bag beneath the bed, pulling out a handgun wrapped in cloth. His hands shook as he loaded the magazine, not from hesitation, but from barely contained rage. Every bullet felt like a promise. When Vanessa's name flashed across his phone, Ethan answered with a snarl. "What do you want?" Her voice was cool, detached. "I want nothing from you anymore, Ethan. The police are closing in. You're finished." Ethan laughed bitterly. "Finished? Not yet. If they think they can drag me out like some criminal, they'll learn what real fear looks like." He ended the call before she could respond, his finger tightening around the grip of the gun. By late afternoon, the motel was surrounded. Officers in tactical gear moved into position, their weapons drawn, their radios crackling with updates. Henry himself stood at the command post, his badge gleaming under the gray sky. "Bring him in alive," he ordered, though every muscle in his body longed to say otherwise. Daniel's voice came over the earpiece. "Unit 3 in position. Awaiting your go, Chief." Henry exhaled, the weight of fatherhood and duty pressing down. "Move in." The officers advanced, boots crunching against gravel, shields raised. They breached the door, only to be met with a hail of gunfire. Ethan was waiting, his face twisted with madness, firing wildly as the motel walls erupted with splinters and smoke. "Shots fired," an officer shouted. Chaos exploded as bullets ricocheted down the hallway. Ethan's voice rang out over the chaos, a manic roar. "Come and get me, Bennett. Let's see if your badge can save you now." Henry clenched his jaw, his heart pounding. This wasn't just a criminal barricaded inside a motel. This was the man who had hurt his daughter, the man who had nearly killed his grandchild. The temptation to storm inside and end it was overwhelming. But then a chilling thought struck him. Ethan wasn't just lashing out. He was desperate enough to take hostages. And when officers reported screams from the adjacent rooms, Henry realized Ethan's last gamble was more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The siege at the motel became a nightmare of thunderous footsteps and flashing lights, and inside the cramped corridors a frightened clerk, a mother clutching two small children, and an elderly veteran pressed their backs together while Ethan paced like a caged animal, threatening everyone with a gun, his rage feeding on terror and desperation. Outside, negotiators set up shields and speakers beneath the dull rain, officers whispering into radios as they coordinated a tactical perimeter. And Daniel Brooks watched feeds with a hard focus, issuing orders with a voice that tried to steady the trembling hearts around him, while he calculated every risk and possible angle to protect hostages and apprehend a violent fugitive. Negotiator Elena Ruiz spoke through a megaphone in patient, even tones, promising safe passage and cautioning against violence, appealing to any humanity left in Ethan, while also sending coded signals to tactical teams. And her voice became a lifeline inside that claustrophobic hallway where fear clung to the walls like smoke and hope felt precarious and thin. Inside, the hostages whispered plans and prayers, the mother rocking her smallest child gently beneath the fluorescent lights, the clerk already plotting a possible distraction by knocking over a trash can, while the old veteran scanned ceiling vents, counting breaths and seconds, knowing that in a standoff the smallest choices sometimes open the narrowest doors to survival and escape. Ethan's demands shifted from incoherent rants to razor-sharp bargaining. He wanted a live line to a sympathetic lawyer. He wanted to humiliate Henry. He wanted a camera trained on his surrender. But beneath the posturing lay a gnawing fear that every minute of delay strengthened his enemies. and weakened the fragile leverage he still clutched. Daniel tracked a shadow across the lot, a figure moving with too much purpose for coincidence, and he radioed Henry, who narrowed his eyes, feeling an old wariness that told him chaos rarely visited alone. Backup teams pivoted, eyes scanning every corner, every dumpster, every alley, while the negotiator kept coaxing calm into a man unraveling at the seams. In the command van, every screen glowed with maps and thermal feeds. Attorneys demanded time, civic leaders demanded answers, and reporters waited beyond the barrier, their cameras hungry for a headline. But Henry blocked access, his voice iron, telling them discreetly that no story mattered more than getting people out alive, and reminding them that human lives would not be sacrificed for sensational copy, he said. And then watched the negotiator, inches from a breakthrough, as Ethan, exhausted and wounded, finally lowered the muzzle to speak. Relief flickered across the lot. But the shadow in the window still moved, and nobody could be sure whether the quiet meant surrender or a tow. Then a sharp sound cracked from the far side of the parking area. A metallic clang, a vehicle backfiring, a misstep. Instant panic flared as heads turned, and the fragile focus shattered. Ethan's eyes snapped toward the noise, his finger twitching, and in that split second, the negotiator barked orders while Henry felt a cold bucket of dread wash over him, and he made the choice he had sworn never to. Authorize a tactical entry at the precise window when the second figure slipped from shadow into motion, and every team member moved as one. The motel erupted into a storm of action, shouting and movement, and the fate of hostages, Ethan, Ethan. The tactical team moved like shadows, bursting through the motel doors in synchronized waves. The hallways echoed with shouts, "Police, drop your weapon!" as boots thundered on cracked tile floors. Smoke grenades hissed, filling the narrow corridors with a thick gray cloud. The chaos was overwhelming, but for Henry Bennett, every second was crystal clear. His daughter's life, his unborn grandchild's future, and the safety of innocent civilians all balanced on the razor's edge of this moment. Ethan Walker stood at the end of the hallway, gripping his pistol, his wild eyes darting from the tactical lights to the hostages pressed against the wall. Sweat soaked his shirt, his breaths came in short bursts, and the mask of confidence he once wore was shattered. Now he looked like what he truly was, a desperate man, cornered by his own sins. The young mother clutched her children tighter as Ethan pressed the gun toward her, shouting incoherently, "You think you can take everything from me? You think you can laugh at me?" His voice cracked, more hysterical than commanding. Henry stepped forward, ignoring Daniel's warning hand on his arm. "Walker," his voice boomed down the corridor, slicing through the fog. "It's over. Put the gun down." Ethan's head snapped toward him, recognition flashing in his eyes. He grinned, twisted and mocking. "Chief Bennett finally decided to show up. What's it like knowing your daughter destroyed me? What's it like knowing you raised a liar, a weakling, Enough," Henry roared, his fury shaking the walls. "You broke her body, but you didn't break her spirit, and now you're going to answer for every scar you left on her." The words hit Ethan harder than any bullet. His smirk faltered, but his grip on the gun tightened. He swung it toward Henry, his face red with rage. The tactical team tensed, their fingers on triggers. One wrong move and the hallway would erupt in gunfire. Sophia's voice suddenly echoed from behind the barricade. She had insisted on being there, refusing to hide. "Ethan," she cried out, her voice steady despite the fear burning in her chest. "Look at me. This ends now. You don't own me anymore. You never did." Ethan's eyes widened, his chest heaving. He shook his head violently. "You were mine. You were supposed to stay." "No," Sophia said firmly, stepping into view, her father's protective arm ready to shield her. "I was never yours. And now, everyone sees you for what you are." The silence was suffocating. Ethan's hand trembled, the barrel wavering between the mother clutching her children, Henry's broad frame, and Sophia's determined gaze. His entire world was collapsing, and he knew it. Then, in a final act of desperation, Ethan screamed and swung the gun upward, aiming not at his hostages but at Henry. 2 shots rang out. The hallway shook with the echo. When the smoke cleared, Ethan lay sprawled on the motel floor, the gun kicked away, blood spreading across his chest. The hostages sobbed in relief, clutching one another as officers rushed them to safety. Henry lowered his weapon. his face carved in stone, his heart pounding with the weight of what had just happened. Sophia stared at Ethan's fallen body, her tears mixing relief with years of buried pain. But before she could breathe freely, a new revelation surfaced. Ethan's crimes had left behind more enemies than anyone imagined, and those enemies were already moving in the shadows. The standoff at the motel ended with sirens echoing across Austin and Ethan Walker bleeding on the floor, his reign of terror collapsing with the squeeze of a trigger. By the time paramedics reached him, the arrogance had drained from his face. He survived, but barely. And survival, as he would soon learn, was no gift. It was a sentence. Ethan was charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, domestic abuse, and money laundering. The courtroom where he once believed he could manipulate the narrative became the stage for his downfall. Witnesses lined up against him. Nurses, neighbors, business partners who testified to his lies, and even former associates from the criminal network he had funded. The recordings Sophia had secretly gathered played aloud, his cruel words filling the chamber like poison. The photographs of his affair with Vanessa Reed were projected on screens, stripping away any shred of dignity he had clung to. Sophia sat in the front row, her belly round with life, her father's hand steady on her shoulder. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like prey. She felt like a survivor, like a warrior who had finally been heard. When the jury declared Ethan guilty on all counts, she exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. The sentence was harsh, decades behind bars. Vanessa had already abandoned him, her ambition stronger than her loyalty. Alone and disgraced, Ethan Walker was left to rot in a cold cell, his name forever associated with betrayal, violence, and cowardice. The man who once believed he owned Sophia now had nothing but the walls of his prison. For Sophia, life finally began to heal. After months of recovery, she returned to her work at the department, not as a broken officer, but as a stronger one. Her colleagues welcomed her with open arms, no longer fooled by Ethan's lies, but inspired by her resilience. She became a quiet symbol of courage, proof that even in the darkest nights, strength could rise. Her father Henry found peace at last. The guilt he had carried for not seeing the truth earlier eased when Sophia told him, "Dad, you didn't fail me. You saved me. You gave me the strength to fight." For Henry, those words healed wounds deeper than any scar. Daniel Brooks, the man who had stood by her side through the storm, slowly became more than an ally. His patience, kindness, and unshakable loyalty built a foundation Sophia had thought impossible to find again. Over time, their bond grew into love. Not rushed, not born of desperation, but steady and true. Months later, Sophia gave birth to a healthy baby girl, her cries filling the hospital room with hope. 2 years after that, she and Daniel welcomed a son into the world, a child born not of fear and violence, but of love and safety. Together, they built a life free of shadows, filled with laughter and grounded in trust. Sophia often sat on her porch at sunset, her children playing in the yard, Daniel beside her, and her father rocking slowly in a chair nearby. She would watch the golden sky and whisper, "We made it." Because in the end, the scars of her past did not define her. Her strength did, her courage did, and the love of her family ensured that she and her children would never live in fear again. Ethan Walker had tried to destroy her. Instead, he created a woman stronger than he could ever imagine. So my friend, here we are. The story has reached its close. If you're still here with me at this very moment, it means something in Sophia's journey touched your heart in a way words alone can't explain. And maybe that's the real point, because stories like hers aren't just about pain, but about healing, resilience, and the power of choosing life over silence. The Stoics often said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Seneca. Sophia's struggle reminds us that while suffering feels endless, it is not who we are, it is only a passage. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That's the lesson Sophia lived. That strength isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to stand despite it. So if her fight stirred something in you, if it made you reflect, cry, or feel hope again, then stay connected with us. Like this video, share it with someone who might need the reminder, and subscribe so we can continue walking these stories together. Because healing is not just hers, it can be yours too.